10 years from today, mankind has inherited the future it once promised itself. Machines think, vehicles steer themselves, cities hum beneath the direction of invisible systems. Men and women live on the moon and on Mars, while the old arguments of a former age lie buried beneath newer and stranger troubles. Because history, having no interest in peace and quiet, has not retired the world's problems, it has merely replaced them. Now there are new afflictions, a neurological sickness that can turn a sound mind violent without warning, nations growing old faster than they can grow young. A newly discovered branch of mankind hidden deep within a jungle, raising questions no law, no science, and no scripture had properly prepared to answer. And somewhere beyond all of that, a scientific finding so cold and so dreadful that it whispers a blasphemy against certainty itself, that the laws of nature may not be as fixed as man once prayed they were. And tonight, in the midst of such a century, the American Republic will gather for a town hall debate. Backstage, beyond the reach of applause and slogans, stand two opponents who do not look much like enemies. Senator Daniel Voss, lean and silver at the temples, wears the expression of a man who has spent his life studying systems large enough to crush people and small enough to be controlled. Governor Elena Marr, calm-eyed and steady-voiced, carries herself like a woman accustomed to speaking hard truths in rooms that preferred softer lies. They greet each other warmly, no bitterness, no public venom, just the guarded familiarity of two people who have known one another long enough to respect the mind, if not the conclusions, of the person standing opposite. And almost at once their conversation turns real. They argue over the psychosis virus, whether a government has the right to screen minds before crimes are committed, or whether such power would become a prison with no walls and no end. They argue over the hidden jungle people, whether they should be left untouched, recognized as a sovereign human cousin, or protected in ways so severe that protection itself begins to resemble conquest. They argue over birth rates, over labor, over the burden of aging nations whose machines can still build a future, even as their people forget how to fill one. They argue over lunar autonomy and Martian dependency, over whether distant colonies are provinces, partners, or the first children ever born old enough to resent their parents. And at last they argue over the most frightening matter of all, a discovery from the laboratories of the world suggesting that one of nature's supposed constants may not be constant after all. Their disagreement is technical, serious, exacting. These are not fools playing at power. These are two highly educated people staring into a century full of sharp edges, each convinced the other may steer civilization into ruin. And then, from nearby, the stage manager clears his throat and says only two words. And just like that, the statesmen disappear and the candidates arrive. Out front waits Bryce Talley, moderator, ringmaster, and high priest of televised equilibrium, a man with a perfect smile and the sacred duty of making sure nothing too substantial survives the hour. The audience rises, the music swells, the cameras glide. Democracy, dressed for entertainment, takes its seat beneath the lights. And instantly the great matters of the age are nowhere to be found. Gone is the virus, gone are the jungle people, gone are the aging nations, the moon settlements, the Martian lifelines, and the trembling question mark hanging over physical law itself. In their place come safer subjects, smaller subjects, loud, bright, chewable subjects. Now the candidates spar over vulgar hologram concerts and celebrity scandals, over whether rock music has become unpatriotic, whether billionaires with off-world estates are visionaries or deserters, whether synthetic actors should win awards meant for flesh and blood, and whether the nation's children are being morally corrupted by companion machines with comforting voices and perfect manners. The audience comes alive. Every insult is a spark. Every cheap laugh is a harvest. Every triviality produces applause the way a lab rat produces motion when the lever is pressed just right. In the control room, the machines confirm what every practiced manipulator in politics already knows. Sentiment trackers bloom, retention curves rise and fall, donor models, outrage models, tribal affinity maps, all of them whispering which note to strike for maximum reward. The technology is magnificent, and almost entirely unnecessary. Because both candidates possess instincts older and subtler than the algorithms. Their gift, or their sickness, is the ability to feel, almost without thought, which lie will flatter, which insult will sting, and which absurd little non-issue can be inflated into a moral emergency for people who no longer know the difference between governance and theater. The machines do not teach them deceit, they merely applaud it. Then, for one brief and dangerous moment, reality dares to enter the room. Her name is Nora Pike, a hospital nurse, mid-50s, plain-spoken. The sort of woman a civilization quietly leans on while pretending not to notice her. She stands and asks what ought to be the most important question of the evening. For a moment, the evening teeters. The room could still become honest. But honesty is a fragile thing, and the crowd has not come here for that. One candidate calls her concern understandable but exaggerated. The other speaks of fringe scenarios and isolated incidents. Both smile with professional pity. Both reduce a living fear to an impolite misunderstanding. The audience, grateful to be rescued from seriousness, laughs softly and lets the moment die. Then comes another. Professor Leon Weller, retired teacher, narrow-shouldered and earnest, with the brittle dignity of a man who still believes that asking a serious question in public should not require courage. He asks about the scientific discovery, the troubling indication that nature itself may be less stable than previously believed. Is the government withholding information, he asks, to prevent panic? The answer comes not in science, nor policy, nor candor. One candidate dismisses the concern as internet paranoia. The other wonders, with polished cruelty, whether the professor's hat may be lined with foil. The audience erupts, and once again the people asking adult questions are treated like children, while the people behaving like children are entrusted with the machinery of the state. Then, late in the hour, the future itself taps on the glass. A producer sees the alert first, then the moderator, then one of the candidates catches the reflection of it in a nearby screen. Elsewhere in the world, something has happened. Another outbreak, another crisis, another crack in the wall. It is the sort of news for which republics were meant to prepare. The sort of news for which leaders were meant to be chosen. The sort of news that ought to silence every petty noise in the room. But the cameras are still rolling, the applause lights are still blinking, the debate still has 3 scheduled minutes remaining. So no one says a word, and the two candidates continue plying their craft. And so the evening closes as such evenings must. Not with wisdom, not with warning, not with a moment of moral clarity rising nobly above the machinery of the age, but with practiced smirks, rehearsed indignation, and the soft narcotic of one more meaningless argument artfully delivered to people who have long since learned to prefer the performance to the truth. The moderator thanks the audience. The cameras begin to pull away. The candidates are still talking, still striking poses, still landing their harmless little wounds upon one another while history waits, unamused, just outside the studio doors. They say there may be a great filter in the universe, some barrier that keeps intelligent life from ever traveling too far, rising too high, or surviving long enough to join the company of the stars. Some say it is nuclear fire, some say disease, some say artificial intelligence, ecological collapse, gamma bursts from the dark, or wandering stones from the old black silence between worlds. All possibilities, all terrible. But in the atomic zone, perhaps the great filter is something less dramatic. Perhaps it is not a weapon, not a plague, not a machine, not a rock from the heavens. Perhaps it is simply this, that a species clever enough to build miracles may still be too vain to face reality, too theatrical to tell the truth, and too easily amused to save itself when saving itself becomes inconvenient. Perhaps civilizations do not perish for lack of knowledge. Perhaps they perish because, at the decisive moment, they would rather be flattered than warned. And if that is true, then the end may come not by monster, or machine, or cosmic accident, but by ordinary men and women doing what they have always done best, being themselves.